Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. Hello and welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where we talk about books. I'm your host, Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, a special guest. You may know him from the Lovecraft episode we've done, or if you're familiar with my Yu-Gi-Tube work, you may know him from his Yu-Gi-Oh channel, Mr. Joseph Rothschild, aka MBT.
Hey, it's nice to be on the show. I know that you're excited to have a celebrity. For those of you who are unfamiliar with my work, I am the individual behind the MBT Twitter account, currently responsible for the only good posts on the entire platform. And
so I've heard.
Yeah, that's the expertise that I bring to today's content mine.
I believe you also have a degree in literature, don't you?
I suppose I do. I have an English degree, ranking me among such titans of industry as every single employee at 7-Eleven. But I aim to use mine for good instead of evil, and we'll see if I can today.
To be fair, Joseph, I don't even have a high school degree, so I think you outrank me in that regard.
Wow. My videos are that much worse than someone without a high school degree?
Yep.
I guess the Academy really is a bunch of hacks.
But yes, introductions aside, we're here today to talk about House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danilowski. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's either that or Danielowski.
I've been saying Danielewski, but I'm sure we will screw it up numerous ways over the course of the episode.
Just call him Mark Z.
Yeah, Marky Z.
What is
ZJ Marky Mark.
Does the Z stand for Zampano?
The Z stands for Danielewski.
Oh, God. Danielewski?
I'm looking it up right now. I can't find what it stands for.
Oh, I'm going to assume Zampano. But yes, those of you who have been following the podcast may know that we've actually done this before. Well, maybe not we. I've done this before. This was the third episode of the podcast. But on that, not only was it early in the podcast, so we hadn't quite gotten down all our format and everything, but my co-host at the time did not read the book. It was just me, because they only really do audiobooks, and House of Leaves cannot be an audiobook. It just can't exist in that format.
I'm very happy to report that I read the inside cover of House of Leaves. No, I did read it. It was an undertaking. And I have no idea how you could ever listen to it in audio terms. Anyway, enjoy this audio podcast discussing it.
Yeah, the point is, I thought we'd do this again, and this time actually have someone with a tiny bit of education who has actually read the book, and have a discussion about the contents rather than just talking about how weird the formatting was, which was most of last time. So I hope you enjoy this, and if you do, maybe we'll do this again next year, because I guess jumping right into just our spoiler-free thoughts, this is one of my favorite books ever. This book is amazing. I enjoy reading it. I love it. Reading through the second time, just as good as the first time. Would recommend to pretty much everyone who reads books.
I have a spoiler-free impression and a spoiler-post impression, so I suppose we'll separate the two.
Yeah.
I would say that my experience with the book, and I am extremely sorry to report this, because I know Hardleg will be disappointed, but I liked it. I did not love it. I had never heard of this, in fact, before I read the book, which is crazy, because all of the stories in the early aughts that migrated from the internet into print, when the internet was the preeminent place where you could experiment with form, I really like a significant amount of them. But I'd never heard of this. I had no context for it. And I think I just missed the boat on it by 6 or 7 years. For those of you unfamiliar with the pair of us, Hardleg is I think 6 or 7 years older than me. And
I'm 33 currently.
Yeah, and I just turned 26, so I expect it's the difference in ages. Someone explained to me that it was Hardleg's generation's Homestuck, a sentence that immediately drove a spear through my soul.
Well, see, I had actually never heard of this either until a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as far as, from my experience, this was kind of a more underground hit. I have not met a whole lot of people who know about it. I was introduced to it mostly through, there's a lot of sort of internet ARG, like, shows, things like Marble Hornets and Everyman Hybrid.
Oh, man.
That claim this is, like, a huge influence. Because, like, you know, the Navidson record is very found footagey, and I believe it came out, like, at the same time as the Blair Witch, maybe, like, a year before. It kind of inspired a lot of these horror shows that are based around the idea of putting cameras up and seeing something supernatural.
In the understanding that, like, it exists within the context of, like, Blair Witch and Marble Hornets and stuff like that, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is very much one of those kind of found footage horrors, and I do think it excels at that, but there are portions of it that, I mean, we'll discuss later, that I found deeply, I think embarrassing is the right word.
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
We'll get to it, but the Blair Witch Project, for example, is horrifying when discussing, like, the intricacies of witches, and less horrifying when the people in the movie are trying to act. Yeah. And you can go, oh, I mean, so that's acting. I can tell what they're doing right and wrong, and it gives a very corporeal quality to something that's main goal is to frighten you with how incomprehensible it is. And, I mean, we'll talk about the specifics of this. Yeah, well, but the end result was, I liked the book a lot. I thought it was really good. I did devour it, but I definitely was a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler just to say, I think you're talking about all the sex scenes.
Well, I'm talking about kind of the Johnny writing in general.
Oh,
and I don't think I'm going to be able to have the discussion without spoiling everything.
Gotcha. I was just like, this is something to know going in. Like, if you're listening to the spoiler free and trying to decide if you want to read this yourself before listening to the rest of the podcast, you should know going in. This is a pretty adult book. This is not for kids, maybe not even teenagers. There's some pretty, like, graphic sex stuff in here. There's a lot of weighty topics, a lot of flowery language that can be almost difficult if you don't read a whole lot.
I would say that, firstly, if you're attempting to go into House of Leaves spoiler-free, you've already made a mistake by clicking a video about House of Leaves. Secondly, stop listening this second and go read it, because the less you know about the book, the better. But third, yes, it is a book that contains multitudes, and a lot of it is pretty graphic.
Yeah, there's some mature content in there. And yeah, but I'm surprised there's a lot of people who, like with my Wheel of Time reviews, I found that looking at the analytics, there's people who have watched up until the spoiler part and then stopped. And then, like, 3 months later, I got a surge in views. Because people they listened to what we said and they're like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And then they went and read it. Which kind of sucks for my analytics, because then I don't get a whole bunch of watch time right off the bat. But it's good for literature in general.
Before you click off the spoiler-free version, go to the midpoint ads and make sure to view them. And then come back.
Well, I just now got 1,000 subscribers, so I don't even have ads yet.
Boo.
Yeah. But assuming you're watching this in the future and I do have ads, and this isn't up on, like, a podcast place, go do that. But what was it? While we're here looking in the spoiler-free part of the show, in addition to just your general thoughts, again, I think you said you would recommend it to pretty much everyone?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I would. I would say that this is such a bad take to fire at a book, because it immediately makes it sound like it's juvenile. But if you are an adolescent boy, I would expect this would resonate with you a lot. Like a 16, 17-year-old dude.
Yeah, it would completely blow your mind.
I would expect, in the same way that I recommend, like, late teenagers watch Evangelion and, like, have a crisis, you probably should read this and have a crisis.
Did you ever read Johnny the Homicidal Maniac?
I did.
That's kind of the same. I think I'd recommend that to edgy teenagers.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, even aside from the content, though, I just think what the book does in terms of how it experiments with the formatting, with the different texts, with the layered narratives and everything, just super interesting concept to, like, even if you don't like the content, it's worth reading just to see how that works, to see what books can do that's not being taken advantage of in, like, 99% of books.
Mm-hmm.
But the other question would be, though, like, with that in mind, how difficult would you say this book is to read?
It was hard. I mean, unsurprising. The book, oh god, hard to do spoiler free. The hardest thing that occurs that I can reveal is that a significant amount of the book is written as sort of a piss take and a genuine attempt at a piece of literary criticism that's about 300 pages long. And in that regard, it is as difficult to read as a textbook would be during those portions.
Interesting. I don't know, maybe I kind of like technical reading, but I actually found the Johnny stuff more difficult to get through.
Oh yeah, I will say, if there were a version of this that did not have the Johnny stuff in it, I would read it in a heartbeat, cover to cover. It is, well, I guess what I would say, the difficult portion of, God, trying really hard not to spoiler here. The book is essentially dueling narratives between a Kerouac-style, like, Bukowski ripoff and a technical text. And you get whiplash from how often they interact, and that makes it difficult to read.
All right, but you didn't have a problem with any of the weird formatting stuff.
We'll get to it, but
okay.
I did not find it particularly difficult. No.
Okay. Yeah, and I think with that case, then you seem to be really struggling with the spoiler free. So from that point on, we're just gonna go ahead. We're gonna start discussing. If you wanted to read House of Leaves and you haven't, go ahead. Otherwise, from here on in, we're just going to assume that either you've already read it or you have no intention to read it. We are not going to break down plot by plot. We're not going to go over everything. We're just going to talk about it and the cool stuff that we found.
Yeah, realistically, I know this isn't a very good ad for it so far because we've said so little, but do read this book. It is quite good. It will be an experience for you no matter what you take from it, and even if you are disappointed by the end product as I was, you will certainly be very glad that you picked it up.
Oh yeah. It's something, like I said, it's even if you don't like any of the characters, any of the stuff, I feel like it's almost important to read this book.
Yeah.
Just to see the interesting things that it can do. If you have any interest, if you have any love for literature at all, this is must read.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that being said, let's go ahead, get into your spoilerific thoughts on this.
Okay, where do you want to start? Well, I'll give you my just sort of overall impression to begin with, if that's okay.
Okay.
So, as we are now speaking as equals, people who have both read the book, the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
What frustrated me far and away was the Johnny stuff. When the book is at its strongest is when it is using the mechanisms that it promises to use. Like at about 100 pages into the book just becomes straight up unreadable, right? Like it promised really early on that it would become that way because the author of the fictional movie The Davidson Record, the author of the critical piece describing it, did start cramming things into margins, and Johnny, the person who is transcribing that account, did say, I'm going to do it as faithfully as possible. So about 100 pages in, you get 4 competing footnotes that are taking up 60 to 70% of the page, while a Johnny narrative, which is a Courier New typeface testament to sex and drugs in Las Vegas, and a Zampano discussion, which is a technical text about a movie that doesn't exist, both kind of vie for authorial control at the same time. And it's super destabilizing. It's super difficult, but more than anything else, it is super interesting.
Yeah.
And then after about 20 pages of this, the clutter on the page is replaced with this enormous black hole in the middle of the manuscript where the footnotes are just gone. And it's it's extreme. It affects tonal shifts, and it doesn't say anything in doing so. There's no writing that says, and now the tone is different. It's just a big honking piece of ink. It is miraculous.
Yeah. And it is, at least to me, what always was amazing to me reading through that for the first time, because that chapter is about mazes.
Yeah.
And there's all this stuff, and I was reading it, and the footnotes start telling you to go ahead 30 pages and back 30 pages, and they're go to the appendices, and then the appendices are see chapter 2, and you're reading it, and I'm literally lost in a maze of words as the characters are lost in a maze. Like, I feel as confused, as disoriented as the characters without them ever describing how the characters feel. It's just from the way the text is formatted.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And the payoff is just so good when you're like, oh, I see. And now I am lost in here, pretty much specifically like the characters are. But then, like, 3 pages later, the book goes back to normal and functionally stays that way until the end. And then you start kind of thumbing back, trying to, like, figure out why the, like, chaos of the previous pages was, like, so important and affecting. And as soon as you thumb back, you see that it was orchestrated in basically the laziest way possible. Like, the dueling footnotes aren't important discussions. They are long, unreadable lists. Like, you don't actually have to pay attention to anything but the text that exists outside of the footnotes. It's like, it's kind of like a definitive case of style at the expense of substance. And then once the style is stripped away later, and they stop doing things like the maze of footnotes, it predictably kind of comes up notably short. And I think this is... sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, even though the maze of footnotes, like, that's definitely the highlight of, like, sort of the formatting tricks, they don't completely stop with that. There's still the parts where, large sections are blank, where they sort of change the pacing of how you read things by putting fewer words. There's the part where, I forget his name. Who's that guy who goes crazy in the maze and shoots everyone?
Holloway?
Holloway. There's the part where they're talking about Holloway standing at the end of a hallway, and, like, the text is literally, like, a tiny person standing, like a dark figure at the end of a long blank page. And, like, his stuff is at the top while they're at the bottom, like, literally at the bottom of the maze. And there's the stuff way later on when Navidson goes back into the house, where, like, everything just like, he's in a completely black void and he's just floating and he doesn't know which way is up or down. And the text starts turning. And there's parts in there where, like, I turn and I read a footnote and I turn and I turn. And I remember reading this at, like, 3 a.m, because once you get to that point, you just want to see how it ends. And, like, I turn a page, and then I forgot which way is the next way. Like, what... I forgot which side of the book is up or down. So, and it calls back to that maze. It's that same thing of, like, now you know how he feels in this strange, ethereal void.
I agree. I think the other best parts of the book is when they start stretching out text to fill up, like, 1,000 pages, and it becomes similarly destabilizing. But that's done within exclusively the context of telling the story of the Navidsons. It's like we get a little reprieve from the technical text that is chock full of footnotes, and we just get an explanation of what's occurring on a film that apparently we have to have not watched to read the book. So I kind of think this is like, I think this is a pretty good mechanism for, like, understanding House of Leaves as a cohesive text, is that the work is primarily focused not on telling, like, the story of Johnny and the story of Zampano, or like the story of the Navidsons, or, like, interweaving narratives in order to draw this comparison from the world that exists and the world we believe exists. I think its primary purpose is trying to convince you that it's cool and is doing cool things. And I wrote this in the immortal words of Hannibal Buress: cool people never say shit like I'm cool. And I think the lack of dedication to the destabilizing techniques, which is definitely the peaks of the book, and the miserable framing device of Johnny, where the author is clearly talking out of his ass, and we'll talk about later, result in a story that's, like, stylistically extremely impressive, but falls apart under pretty much any sort of serious scrutiny. That said, the stylistic stuff is so good that I did come away being like, it rocked.
See, that's the thing, is even though I think the style is kind of, like, almost separate from the substance of what the story is about, I still think there's enough there to get invested on, where, like, if you made a movie of the Navidson record, I think that story, like, stands out on its own as a pretty compelling narrative.
Yeah.
I think the story of Johnny, even though it gets way too flowery, he goes way over the top, there is something that's kind of haunting about the idea of a man is reading a book and it's driving him mad, and he seems to think it's supernatural, and you are reading the same book alongside of him. And at least to me, like, sitting at home alone, like, I live by myself, and reading about Johnny talking about, like, there's this feeling of a darkness behind him. This thing that is going to come through the window with claws and tear him apart. And my heart started beating real fast because I get those feelings sometimes when I know I'm alone and then I feel like something might be there.
The best written part of the book is, God, I'm not going to be able to call up the exact page number because I didn't mark this correctly. But it's when they're describing there's something behind you and, like, looking behind you, giving it definitive, like, sway over you, acknowledging that it exists behind you is how you die.
Yeah.
Like, you have to just straight up ignore and not look.
You have to keep going. Yeah, there for every terrible Johnny part, there's a really good Johnny part that sort of draws me in and makes me be like, okay, well, this isn't completely without merit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, I would say it was good, and I did like it a lot. It just wasn't kind of the life-changing manuscript I think I expected it to be, and that is probably unfair from my perspective to impart that onto something I hadn't read.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, you make a fair point that he experiments with all the formatting, but he doesn't go, like, all the way with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things, like, I think that's just by nature of him doing something unprecedented. At least, maybe I'm just, like, ignorant of other books, but I can't think of any other book that does stuff like this.
I mean, there is a pretty long history of, like, postmodern and post-structuralist works that are extremely destabilizing in similar ways and use, like, formatting stuff. I guess the easiest one to be, like, the Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure books do commit to the footnotes telling you to go to different pages, just like this one does for, like, an hour.
I mean, that does have, like, an element of, like, choice and stuff in it, but that in those it almost feels like a gimmick. Like, that doesn't add anything to the story either. Mm-hmm. It gives you, like, a very, very vague sense of control or branching pathways, but, like, I really want to see... I think I talked about this in the first episode, like, it would be interesting to see some of these experimentations taken into, like, mainstream books. Like, not used all the way, but just the fact that, like, okay, you're reading something like Percy Jackson, and then when it gets to an action scene, they start putting less text on the page, they fill out less of it, so that as you're reading, you're flipping pages, you're going faster and faster. Mm-hmm. Almost in time, like, using the formatting to increase pacing. Mm-hmm. It's like, there's a lot of really neat ideas here that he kind of experimented with, and I haven't seen done before or since. I don't know, if you know of any other ideas, either you or anyone in the chat, like, let me know, because I would love to read more, like, experimental fiction like this.
I'm not going to be the person who tries to sell you on Infinite Jest. I won't be that person. You can't make me do it.
I hear that brought up sometime. I was kind of interested in it, but you and the other people on your Discord said it was, like, terrible.
Oh, my Discord is a bunch of joyless fucks. And you can tell them I said that.
They'll hear it.
Yeah, I'm sure. But, you know, outside of the obvious critique that, like, the stylistic things come at the expense of the substance of the work, I think there is just so much to talk about here. So I don't want to, like, bog the whole thing down with my opinion of, like...
Oh, it's okay. This whole book is literally about talking about books.
Yeah, gonna be extremely cyclical here. By the end of this, I am going to measure my room.
Yeah. I just want to say, that is one of those real weird meta things, is that, like, Zampano is talking about a movie that doesn't exist, Johnny is talking about Zampano talking about the book, the editors are talking about Johnny talking about that, we're talking about all three of them, and then if someone listens to our podcast and talks about it, it's just like, the levels of literary critique are just like Inception.
Like the telephone game of Lovecraft and horror.
But, I did want to mention real quick, I guess you read the book. Did you follow the footnotes in chronological, like, order as you encountered them?
Okay, so, the first time that I read the book, I followed the footnotes and the Johnny interruptions kind of as delivered. And then when I was told to read the appendix with the Whalestone letters, I just stopped and read that and then came back.
So that's basically, that's how I did it the first time as well. I think that's during the maze. They tell you to go read the Whalestone letters, don't they?
Yeah, and I was like, oh, great. Well, at least these are coherent. And of course, that lasts about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Whereas, like, that's how I did it the first time. But coming at this a second time, I actually did I'd read the Navidson stuff, and then if a Johnny footnote came in, I just skipped over it.
That's the optimal way to read this book.
Skipped over all the footnotes, read through it. There's actually a point right at the start of the maze where there's like one footnote that says like, stay on the path, don't deviate your eyes. Where they're talking about something else, but I'm like, good advice.
Well, and
that's how you don't get lost in the maze.
It's good that, that comes at a time when the remainder of the footnote is literally just like, just words. It's just words.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was kind of interesting because of that, I basically read the whole book and then read the Whalestone letters.
Right.
So that does kind of color your picture of Johnny a little bit differently because I'd forgotten some stuff about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why he acts that way.
I can't imagine not reading Whalestone like early, because it just informs so much of Johnny, and be like, oh god, if I had gotten to this at the end, I would really have been uncharitable towards him.
He's already so random that like when he mentions stuff, it's like it doesn't even faze me, and then later on it's like, oh okay.
Oh, I also read the Pelican poems as they came up. But realistically, I did not get a whole lot from them.
I skipped all of them this time.
It feels like something that matters to people who are smarter than me.
Yeah, possibly. Well, it has to do with something that I'll bring up a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just interesting that, like, kind of you were talking about the choose your own adventure. There is sort of an aspect of this where it's like, if you really wanted to, you could just ignore Johnny and read the whole Navidson record. Choose that adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I was just gonna say, moving on, the next topic, what would you say that House of Leaves has a genre? Would you consider it a horror story?
So first, no. It is scary, but scary in like a cosmic sense, not scary in like a boo kind of sense.
It's like an existential dread kind of sense.
Yeah. It just is a lot of things.
Yeah.
The part that was most compelling to me is it seemed to almost be a parody of literary criticism. And this is probably me projecting a lot because...
a lot of people have said that, actually.
Oh, good. Thank God. No, I was, for a time, I was like, I'm going to be a literary critic when I grow up, and then I will die and no one will know my name. So, but it is really just, I mean, some of the stuff is amazing. There's the start of one of the chapters, there's a Goethe quote, I want to say like a quote from the Divine Comedy, and a third quote tying them together. And you go, whoa, what an interesting way to start this chapter. There's a footnote from Johnny, and Johnny goes, so what Zampano would do is he would go to someone else who had done a cute literary trick, steal the literary trick, and then he would quote the primary sources that they used to make it sound like he had read all of those individual ones and discovered it. And I was like, I would do that all the time. That is a classic literary critic trick, is just being like, here's the conclusion I've come to that I must have divined from the ether. And then you quote like the Divine Comedy and not like someone's thesis on it. It was great.
What's interesting is I've heard some people say that this is like almost a takedown of literary criticism, that it's so absurd with the fact of so many people commenting on it that it's meant to like sort of show almost how useless it is. And then I've heard other people say the opposite, that this is like an example of why literary criticism is so important. Because stuff like, to me, one of the more emotional parts, one of the more moving parts is sort of finding out the meaning of Delisle.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get that without literary criticism of Will Navidson and judging like him and the story and like outer meta-textualism and stuff like that.
So, firstly, the names of the papers are amazing. They're all the same type of, like, stupid, punny garbage that crit writers name their work. But they are helpful, They're like, okay, so there is, like, an analytic school of literary criticism, and they would be super preoccupied with, like, Freudian interpretations of, like, what the literal vagina in the middle of the house looks like. It's like, okay, that makes sense and is cool. That said, as a piece of literary criticism, Zampano's account of the Navidson record isn't very good because it's mostly a synopsis. Like, it works for us because we don't know what's in the movie, but, like, to be telling an existing school of established thought And then the movie ends. They're going to be like, duh, we went to school to talk about the movie. And then what is kind of, I mean, just completely out of place for me in the context of the literary criticism portion is the like exit interviews with like Derrida and stuff, where like they go and meet like Freud to play tennis and ask him what he thinks of like the man that I loved. And that part is so weird.
Yeah, the transcript of what some have thought.
What some have thought, I mean, we'll talk about a little bit later. But
okay.
Its inclusion in it makes me think that this has to be a parody of literary criticism, or like Mark had some like frustration with it that he was trying to voice. And for what it's worth, I mean, he did a bang up job on writing it because it's very, very compelling.
Yeah. Well, like I said, again, I kind of feel like it almost legitimizes the criticism rather than mocking it, because it shows how many different ways you can view the book. How
like
many
these
different
would
things
exist.
Yeah.
I was actually very disappointed when I logged onto the internet and found like no body of work discussing this book, because I was like, well, you promised me there would be some of them. So I would say that in terms of the general horror of the piece, like, yes, it is horror insofar as it's about people getting lost and then, you know, there's a monster maybe. But the people affected, by virtue of the school of literary criticism that's fundamentally developed by this movie, I mean, are just a testament to the fact that despite no contact with the house whatsoever, the themes that this sort of exploration pose are so universal that they resonate with all these people, despite the fact that they have nothing more than like an academic interest in the Navidsons' record.
I think that's kind of the interesting thing about it, because it's
Yeah.
like, if you just take the Navidson record, like if you just watched it without Zampano explaining all the stuff about it, it would probably come off as like a very basic kind of schlocky horror movie. It's the fact that he tells you that stuff symbolizes stuff and other people have seen symbols in it that sort of makes it have more weight.
And, like, I'm a dumb baby, but I'm, like, reading this and, like, getting swayed by the arguments of the fake literary critics. I'm like, oh, yes, that is a vagina, clearly. Oh, yes, yeah. I bet Derrida would say that. And then, about halfway through, there is reference to a study on the continued effects of anxiety among the people whose job it is to write scholarly work about the Navidson record. And I'm like, I am becoming one of these people. I see. I am getting this anxiety.
Once again, the nightmare becomes reality.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't read a text that does something like that and be like, it was ineffective. Like, it was so good.
So then I guess that brings... So you've heard all the literary critics. What do you think the house symbolizes? Is it a vagina?
I don't know. I do think this is going to sound so pretentious, but like, in a lot of ways, I think that the sort of quest to find the dimensions of the house that just reveal the scale of its enormity are pretty congruent to the attempt to find the meaning of the house that just reveal a scale of scholarly work that would hypothetically exist that is just daunting, right?
Yeah.
I was like a Pomo guy when I was going to become a literary critic, so like I do default to the shitty stuff they make Derrida say, but I do feel that like a lot of I mean, it is very helpful that there are very physical characteristics of the house, right? Like, as you become more anxious or more decentralized, it does shift and expand and change. And it's hard to take away anything other than, like, so the house does represent, to some degree, you know, the psyche of, like, modern man. And there's a lot of really good references to work that are, like, a deep desire for exploration. The most interesting work referenced to me is the one that examines like Holloway and Will's sort of dichotomous relationship with the unknown, where one seeks to document and one seeks to conquer, but both of them like require the unknown. And I'm like, that sounds cool. I want to read it. How about you? How do you feel about it?
I still don't know. I've been thinking about this for like several days. This is one of the questions I wrote And it's like, every time I read it, I'm like, the house is, like, literally creativity. It's like a metaphor for writing a book. It's a metaphor for, like, making art. Where it's like, you have to go into the unknown, and there's this infinite void, and you can make anything, and sometimes it destroys you, and you don't finish what you set out to do. Sometimes you get lost in it. And then other times, it's like, I kind of feel like it's a religious metaphor. Like, the house is God. I think what Will Nevinson says at one point. Yeah. Where he's like, it's this big, vast, unknowable thing, and you want to know it. You kind of just have to have, like, faith that maybe it exists and hope for it. And it's, I don't know, but it's super interesting to ask people what they think about it. Because you get such, like, insight into what they think. Because, honestly, after reading it twice and looking at other literary criticism, I don't think he intended it to be a single metaphor. I think he purposely made it vague so that people would read whatever they want into it. The house is a reflection for the people who read it, just like it's a reflection of the people who go into it.
Right. And it, the existence of the fake body of work is like, yeah, we know that the house as an artifact contains multitudes, and like, good luck.
Good luck. Why is it blue? I have no idea.
I have some, like, ideas about why it's blue. I think the blue part is, like, a cool stylistic gimmick.
Yeah.
But what really stuck out for me was the displacement. Because I thought it was a printing error in my copy. But as the house shifts dimensions, the position of the word house when it's highlighted will change. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Like, it'll be offset by a couple of millimeters.
Huh. I did not notice that.
Yeah, like, I just, I don't know. I think it's cool. I think it's good. I do think that the text does a good job of kind of summing up what the interpretation of the house would be for different schools of literary criticism. Like, they've got masculinity for, like, femcrit. They've got, like, literal deconstruction for post-structuralists. They've got womb for Freud. But
they've got the one girl who's just like an architectural engineer, and she's just like, the house is an interesting monster.
Yeah, it's like,
essentially,
I bet.
Where she just like takes it literally.
Yeah. I'm
surprised there's no Marxist reading.
I literally wrote
class
that.
Struggle.
I was like, it is weird that there is not anything about Marxist criticism, because like, there kind of is, I don't know, I don't want to gush about this kind of stuff, but like, there kind of is a pretty poignant Marxist reading in so far as like, Karen is, her name's Karen, right?
Yeah.
Karen is like an heiress in a lot of respects, and it's implied that she is very independently wealthy. Will is a documentarian who is literally making money photographing starving children. Individuals who have the least economic mobility are usually the ones who are swallowed by the fucking thing. And
yeah.
for some reason, it's just, there's like one offhand reference to class, but I'm like, boy, you're extremely naive if you think Marxists wouldn't have a field day with this one. Oh man.
Yeah, I was saying, yeah, you make a good point. I didn't think there was, and I was like, oh yeah, but his brother was like really low class, and he was the one who got killed by it.
It sucked.
And like, Holloway was...
He was motivated by a desire for, like, riches. He wanted money. And,
yeah.
His
assistants, who were poorer than him, were the ones who got the
they
most
get killed
hurt by it.
Yeah. I don't know.
Granted, they got killed by him. His quest for money caused him to kill those under him.
Now we're just writing the fake work that's in this book.
You're welcome, Mark.
No, but I would favor like a femme interpretation of this. I don't think it's an accident that like the hole in the center of the house like waxes and wanes based on the amount of sex that like Will and Kate are and Karen are having. I don't think it's a mistake that all of Johnny's like formative experiences, all of the things that distract him from like the ever gnawing hole in his heart are like vaginas. Like, you can write all you want about holes and Freud will come knocking on my door and shoot me dead. But yeah, I do think that those are the portions in which I'm the most interested in this.
Yeah, well, I guess that does bring us to the next point, your first point, where you were asking, you wanted to talk about Johnny and his fixation on sex.
Yeah.
How every fucking John, not every bit, but he does have a lot of, like, just lewd, like non sequiturs almost, where he just goes out. It's like, hey.
So, if you've listened to the podcast to this point without having read the book because you don't think you want to read the book, I'll just explain real quick. In the middle of Zampano, like, talking about the specifics of the Navidson record, there will be an unrelated footnote, and then, like, 4 pages of Johnny Truant. Truant? Am I saying that right?
Truant.
It's
like his thing because, what was it? His mom would get those letters.
Right, and say Johnny's a truant, yeah.
Yeah.
But he'll go off for like 4 pages about like a recent lay or like a party he went to with his friend Lude, Lude, and it is every time it is super jarring because it comes out of nowhere. And what frustrates me about these passages is, unfortunately, I just think they're poorly written. They sound like someone who is trying to channel like the cool Vegas bad boy style character, but they come off as like really hollow and cynical. But I will say I'm willing to like the easy out for this on the part of Mark is that Johnny doesn't do any of this shit. Like all of the Johnny stories, and Johnny is open about this, are clearly embellished. Lude is clearly not Lude's name. Like, the man's name is Quaalude and, like, Lude, like, sexual... Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Truant is not Johnny's last name.
No one in Johnny's stories has a real name.
Exactly.
Even his love interest, Bambi, or Thumper.
Yeah, and I feel...
And his boss is just his boss.
I'm willing to buy that a significant amount of the Johnny work, just like, sort of like how Karen would, like, look in the mirror every night and practice her smile or whatever... I feel like a significant amount of the Johnny work is a creative writing exercise for Johnny to kind of convince himself that he is, like, living a cool Hollywood life and lady killing.
Here's one thing. I'm not sure if you noticed this. Everyone that he sleeps with is actually one of Zampano's former helpers who would come to read to him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's a theory that Johnny doesn't exist at all. This is all written by Zampano. And he's an old blind man who probably has ED at this point, who is constantly talking with these young, attractive women. And Johnny is his way of sort of getting out his frustrations. He's writing porn about the girls that come to read about him, about being this young, hot man who goes around and is a tattoo artist and does cool stuff. And the idea that the Navidson record is tearing apart his soul is just more ways for him to put literary criticism, saying his work is that good that it would drive you insane.
That is interesting. I'm certainly willing to give a lot of credence to, like, Johnny is either an invented identity for someone who is unremarkable, or Johnny is fictitious entirely, because it really does read as just, like, the porn version of what you would think like a Hollywood layabout would be. Like, for example, Lude has a list of the girls that he hooked up with in a period of time when they score a lot of really good ecstasy. And Johnny invents a traumatic experience for each of these girls, implying that, like, this is what messed them up enough to get involved in, like, the Hollywood drug scene. And it's just like, It is the most unhinged thing I have ever read. I remember reading that and going, oh, so Johnny is out of his mind. Like, any semblance of, like, realism you can expect from Johnny in this being a correct account of how he found the manuscript and started transcribing it, it's just gone out the window. There is no way this person is reliable or, like, a functioning human in any regard.
Yeah, he told you he was unreliable at the beginning, where he said, like, his water heater went out, and then in the Navidson
he put water heater in the fucking text.
He's like, it was heater, I added water. He's like, don't complain, I changed one word. Like, that's him just admitting, like, yeah, he probably made everything up. I mean, the first big footnote from him is him telling about how he goes to bars and makes up these long, elaborate stories about stuff.
And then we have to read a long, elaborate story about the hot woman he banged. And it's like, guess I'm not going to connect any dots here. Regardless, it's clearly like a deflection point, and it comes at times in the text when it's like, oh, so this portion of Zampano's script would force introspection to someone with the relationship to sex that Johnny has. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that, like, Johnny's trying to deflect from like his own personal kind of Minotaur or hallway inside him, but they do really launch from nowhere, and they do try very hard to be very cool.
See, it's interesting though you bring up that list, because the list had a very different thing to me. Does Johnny say he made up all those things, or does he? I thought he found that stuff out later.
No, he made it all up. They're all like invented circumstances that would cause like the girls to be screwed up. One of the girls was mad at Lude afterwards, and he was like, "Oh, they could all be mad at Lude. Here is how that could happen." And it was like, one was assaulted, one was molested as a child, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, I remember.
I guess that could happen.
Not necessarily all of them were like that. Well, they were talking about like one has like a hole in the roof of her mouth because of constant cocaine use.
Yeah.
But that always struck me as like, up until that point, every sexual encounter was always just sort of like this cool, hot thing that happened, or it was trying to make itself out to be like that. And then that's the one point where they're like, you know, oh, Lude banged like 8 women. And then it goes off and be like, and by the way, all of them are real people who have had bad stuff happen to them with a lot of problems in their lives. And you shouldn't think of them as just these sexual objects. They have history.
I think that is an extremely charitable interpretation. And for what it's worth, I think the invention of traumatic scenarios to make the people that this guy's hooking up with, more like sympathetic is just as absolutely weird as making up sleeping with them.
Yeah.
I think they are similarly like weird, and
it is
nestled in a weird pornographic thing.
Yeah, it is super weird. It is kind of exploitative, but like if you wanted to get someone's attention, just immediately go from like 0 to 100, be like sexy time and also trauma.
Yeah. For what it's worth, it did get my attention.
Yeah.
God, I cannot find this. And the index is no help.
Yeah, it's really... Why do they... this makes me feel like there's some sort of hidden puzzle that I'm not getting, because they have, like, that index at the back, where it lists, like, 1 million words and then tells you what pages those words appear on.
And, like, often they are lying, and sometimes there's words that don't exist. It's like, oh, cool, awesome. Sometimes there's a DNE next to something, and it's like, oh, awesome, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, what was it? I remember, and I wish I could find where this happens, because I marked it, but I marked everything with the same dog ears, so I can't fucking find anything. But there's one point where they say the word house and it's not blue.
Oh, weird.
And I looked in the back, and it says, like, they have house in blue, and they list all these pages, and then they say house in black does not exist. I'm like, what? No, there's one of them! You missed one!
That's wild.
I think I just found a flaw. Speaking of finding stuff, did you see the check mark?
I did, yes. It comes after you read the Whalestone letters if you do it in order, and I'm like, oh, like right after. I was like, oh, cool.
Okay.
It's on 97, which is the same chapter where the SOS thing happens.
And then Johnny uses the SOS to spell out fuck.
Awesome, by the way.
Did you notice that?
I went and looked up all the SOS things. I was like, oh, there's probably some stupid stuff in here.
Yeah, and there's also... Oh, yeah, there was one more thing I forgot to bring up. The theory that, like, it's just Zampano writing everything. Mm-hmm. Or Zampano wrote everything except for, like, the Whalestone letters. Mm-hmm. The theory would be that, I forget the name of Johnny's mom. But yeah, there's this idea that Zampano was her husband. He didn't die. The child died, and that's why she was there. She's writing letters to Johnny. Johnny's not just truant. He doesn't actually exist. Pelafina. There's that part where she's in the middle of her psychosis, her delusions or whatever, and she writes that long rambling letter where she's like, the first letter in each word. Uh-huh. She does that before in one of the earlier poems, or the earlier letters, and she says, like, my dearest Zampano, where have you gone?
Yeah. I didn't figure that out, but I read it afterwards on the internet.
Yeah, the same with me. I never would have thought to go back and try to apply that. But let's see. So moving on. Lots of discussion we could have. I'm not sure if I'm going to edit this down or if this is just going to be like the longest episode.
You're going to have to.
Yeah, but you were curious, who is the editor?
Yeah, it was the jarringest portion for me is like 30 pages after they spend all this time being like, the people who read this get screwed up, just so you know, this is going to be a bit of a journey. There's just a random Ed note. It's like, Johnny misspelled this word, Ed. And like 4 or 5 times the editor intervenes, and usually it's when Johnny's contact for translating German, who he offended, and they stopped talking to him, prevents him from translating a German passage. So, like, in some German passages, it won't be translated. There will be a Johnny footnote, and Johnny will say something like, we're not talking. And then there will be a footnote to that is the translation with an editorial credit.
I never really thought about the editors. I just didn't occur to me that, like, the editors read the book and it didn't affect them, and they were just like, yep, let's just publish this.
It was weird. I mean, we'll talk about the ending in a little bit, but the existence of the book as, like, an artifact in the world of the book is super weird insofar as, like, this is a very dangerous thing to publish, and they felt comfortable doing it, and clearly were not affected. It's like, okay.
Yeah, well, now that I think of it, though, that actually might make a good point. It's like, the manuscript never had any magical properties to it. It was never a dangerous thing. It was just Johnny sort of interpreting it. And maybe that's why, because after he sees that, like, there's a band playing the 5.5-minute hallway song, which is a real song, by the way, he sees that they have it, and they're obviously fine. They're not homeless transients wandering around the United States. So clearly he sort of realizes, like, it wasn't Zampano, it was just him. And that's when he sort of brings everything to a close. He has that fantasy about getting better where he may or may not actually have gotten better.
The one purpose that I would say that Johnny's letters serve, in terms of, like, existing within the story, and again, this is a stretch, me trying to justify the Johnny writing, is that they kind of anchor the reader, right?
Yeah.
Like, you get a sense that if you were to just read the Davidson record cover to cover, you might go, like, too far in a sense. Just like you would, like, run through the hallway and end up completely lost. And in some way, like, like the weird neon markers that Holloway is putting down are kind of like Johnny's notes, if you view the text as an extension of the hallway. And maybe those were necessary both for mass publication and to anchor, like, the people editoring it into, like, the reality of, the day-to-day existence of a person and not a body of literary criticism surrounding a like horrifying world.
So maybe that's why the editors haven't gone mad, because Johnny putting that stuff in there has somehow made the Navidson record, like, lose its impact on people.
And there are, like, portions in which it's like, oh, it's been this amount of time, it's time to plot down another flag in the sand that is a Johnny interlude.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. I don't know, potentially.
It does kind of make sense, especially, again, we'll get to this when we talk about the ending, but Johnny's, like, sort of last statement, that, like, the last story he tells that has almost nothing to do with anything, but it adds this sort of, like, bittersweet, hopeful stamp on everything. Maybe the point of that is to make the Navidson record not, like, drive you insane. At least assuming that this is all real and this is, like, from a practical standpoint, like, he has found a way to quell the curse by using hope. It's so cool. Making me realize things, Joseph.
Oh, jeez.
God, I love this book.
It's quite good.
There's so much to talk about. But, okay. We gotta get to the rest of the... Okay, well, we already really talked about who's real and everything.
Yeah,
I kind of, like, went to that early. My apologies.
No, that's fine. It is a good discussion, just in general, about who exists and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's hard to get a sense of it. Johnny starts the entire book by saying, so no one in this book is real. The reference materials that are translations or references to famous literary works do exist. Those that are references to a body of literary criticism surrounding the Davidson record don't. Neither does the Davidson record, and although the people exist, they don't know what the Davidson record is.
Yeah.
But as Johnny kind of continues, it becomes less and less clear that that is the case. He starts talking to, like, effectively primary sources for criticism on the Navidson record, and it's like, oh, interesting that this is so important. And very, very odd that, like, so much time is being spent worrying about the logistics of criticism on something that doesn't exist. And I think you get a good sense of the context in which the Navidson record exists when Johnny's, like, going to colonial Williamsburg
To try to find the house.
Yeah, and it's like, he goes to find the house, but gets in an argument with a costume person who is pretending they exist in this world in which, you know, it's the 1800s or something. Just like Johnny is kind of mad that they're refusing to enter his world in which the Navidson record exists, which at this point I think he kind of believes to some degree it does.
Yeah, he kind of has to, because if it doesn't exist, then why is he going so crazy?
Right, then it's a him problem.
Yeah.
But I think there's a couple different interpretations of, like, how the Navidson record interacts with reality, but the coolest one, I think, is... just like kind of the hallway obliterates anything that you leave there, the existence of a body of work surrounding the Navidson record obliterates itself in a similar way, right? Like it becomes harder to remember or talk about, or film screens get fucked up, or carbon dating is less useful than it would have been otherwise.
So talking about the Navidson record has erased the Navidson record from existence.
Just like if you leave shit in the house, it just disintegrates.
Huh.
Criticism around the house disintegrates in a similar fashion.
Interesting. Yeah, that's...
That would explain... That's one reason why House might be blue, is that it's, like, disappearing from the page.
It's slightly less dark than black, perhaps.
Da-da!
Oh, hey, I was flipping through the page. I found the one that has Braille on it. It's not raised. But there is a quote from Poe, who is woman who did the House of Leaves album.
This is 423, right?
Yes.
Worth noting, and this happens a couple of times, the footnote on this page is not numbered. It's got a signatory that is a plane signal.
Huh. It's a little arrow.
You can see it in the collage on 582. It is a ground air emergency code signal, and each one of these is represented in a footnote somewhere. It's like, oh, fun.
Huh.
Because the dad was a naval pilot and then flew off.
I didn't even think about that. It's just so much stuff here. Jeez.
It is a tome.
Yeah, I wish I had looked up more. I've heard there's like a theory that like Karen wrote everything somehow.
Karen was like,
and I'm like, I can't think of like how that would possibly work out or what that means for the... I don't know, it's just so weird that we could sit here and argue about who's real, and it's like, well, no one's real technically.
I mean, that's
it's just Mark.
That's
Mark
the point,
literally
right?
wrote everything.
That's the point, is if we blur the lines of what's real and what's fake within the context of the book, who's to say that those lines can't extend beyond the book, you know?
Yeah.
And Johnny's admission that some of this stuff does exist and some doesn't is a lot of the same feelings that I had reading the book and being like, okay, so does this actually exist, or is this another fake literary critic?
Sorry, I'm flipping through stuff and I got distracted for a second. Apparently there's a thing, like, what was it? You have the book right next to you, right?
Yeah.
You know, you go into the first page, and there's a little collage or whatever. There's a page talking about all the reviews, and on the next page, all it says is, like, Mark Z. Danilowski's.
Yeah.
Apparently, he designed it that way because they wouldn't let him not put his name, like, inside of it, but you're supposed to tear that page out so that it opens right up to say House of Leaves by Zampano with Johnny Truant. And it doesn't have anything acknowledging that it's an outside work of fiction.
Oh, really? I'll do that right now. Hell yeah.
I don't know, I've been thinking about it, but part of me is just like, I don't want to rip a book.
Yeah.
What am I going to do with that page? Can't just throw it away? It's part of the... I don't know. Let's see, the Minotaur Passages.
Oh, yes.
And I believe you were talking about the ones on page 110. Joe, if you can get a picture of that, put it up on the screen for those watching on YouTube, which is everyone at the moment.
Oh, good. I don't have to explain it. It is very odd. So the Minotaur as it exists in this book is super weird. We've kind of somehow been able to avoid it as we navigate the maze of the response to this book. Yeah. But,
it doesn't play a huge role in things, partially because the whole point, it exists to have been cut out of the book. Zampano purposely tried to remove it.
As important as it, like, presumes to be, you do end up with a sense that Zampano might have removed it because, like, it was dangerous, or he could have removed it because, like, he was swayed by an interpretation that it actually doesn't exist. And it's like, I'm not sure, but it is kind of weird that the amount of importance necessary is paid to this.
And of course, Johnny has a dream that he's the Minotaur.
Right. And yet it doesn't really do anything ever.
Well, now that I think of it, it's quite possible that the reason why all the Minotaur stuff is crossed out is not because Zampano wanted to do it, but because Johnny did.
Like, he could just be straight up lying to us, because he says, like, I unscrubbed it, but it's like, alright, well...
Well, it's one of those things where, you had mentioned earlier about how, like, if we want to look at everything as, like, having actually happened, as, like, Johnny is real, Zampano is real, everything is sort of, like, real within the point of the narrative, and he somehow found a way to make House of Leaves not have a curse. It's possible that by scrubbing out the Minotaur stuff, he literally removed the monster from the house.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that.
Again, because he had the dream that he was the Minotaur. So maybe House of Leaves, like, turns you into the monster. The monster is you, it's what you think you are. And so by erasing the Minotaur and then adding some, like, touching stuff at the end, he has removed the hate, the monstrous parts from the Navidson record.
I do want to point out that the Minotaur never does anything in the script. It never kills anyone. It shows up on screen for maybe one frame of a movie.
Yeah.
Everyone who dies in this work, with the exception of the Gdańsk man, who maybe does not die at all, pretty much everyone dies as the result of inevitability. And, like, when Holloway is sitting, it's almost a comedic moment. When Holloway is sitting recording himself, waiting for the Minotaur to close in so he can kill it or, like, get into a fun fight with it that will... justify a life of conquering, and then it fails to appear forever, and he gets so scared he just, like, guns himself down, and then does it wrong, and then bleeds out on camera, and then is swallowed by the Minotaur. It's like, so clearly the Minotaur, its existence, you know...
The Minotaur was Holloway. It was getting louder because he was becoming more monstrous. The Minotaur did kill him.
From my position, I think the Minotaur exists to give a finality to the house. And I guess to life or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, there is no inevitability unless you know you will die at the end. And so, the people inside the interior of the house feel as if they are constantly trying to keep ahead of something, when in reality, what ends up killing people is, like, bleeding out or running out of food. Or the fear that they will have to succumb to the inevitable, which is the Minotaur that literally never comes. And for that, if the Minotaur exists as an inevitability in the house, not an antagonist, then, you know, you get into a larger discussion of, is the horror of House of Leaves that, oh my god, there's a Minotaur after me? Or is the horror that I know as, like, a fundamentally, detrimentally sick person that inevitably I will lose myself? And, like, from Johnny's perspective, his, like, personal Minotaur, if you want to put that in quotes or something, is his family's history of mental illness.
Yeah.
And, like, just like his mom eventually just lost it, I think it's pretty clear with the, like, unbelievable amount of self-medicating and unresolved issues with female sexuality, that he is similarly afraid of, at some point, just losing a handle on things.
I mean, clearly he has, by reading this book.
Yeah. Right, and by the end of it, you know, he is measuring his house and buying guns to protect himself from the Minotaur, but the fake scenario in which he gets better is solved by getting therapeutic help and, like, medication.
Yeah.
Like, it's not solved by him going down to the street and gunning down the Minotaur. It's, like, somehow innately he recognizes that the thing chasing him to his grave is, like, himself.
Yeah.
And the Minotaur exists as an externalization of that, but not, like, as a fucking man with hooves and a horn. And,
It's one of those things where it's like, what he needs to survive is not to kill the Minotaur, it's to find friends who are willing to help him.
Yeah, and like, he recognizes that, and then is like, oh, but that was a sarcastic bit I was doing. Oh, but that's not real. Time to go gun down the Minotaur. And it's like, well, okay, dog. Good luck.
Again, he says that, and then again, that I'm always struck by that very last passage, which I guess kind of brings us to the ending of the story. Because that's the last thing that Johnny does, is he's like, let me tell you one more story. And he tells the story about the young mother who has, like, the baby, and it's born with, like, holes in its head. Or not holes in its head, holes in its brain. Mm-hmm. And they're just like, it's going to die. And they put it on life support, and they're like, just tell us when you want to pull the plug. And the mother sits there and, like, whispers to it for, like, 3 days straight. And all the nurses and everything start gathering around. They start feeling like they're witnessing a miracle. They're like, she keeps talking to it. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't do anything. Like, maybe this baby will live. Maybe something great will happen. And then in the end, the mother's just like, okay, you can let him go now. And the doctor's like, what? And then before he can do anything, the baby just dies on its own. And it's one of those things, like, I've only read this twice, but every time I read that, and even when I've, like, described it to people, like, it kind of makes me tear up. It kind of it has this profound, like, effect on me. And even though it, like, I guess it should be a sad thing because a baby died, but I never feel that. I feel like there's some, like, hope in this world. It gives me this profound feeling of, like, everything's going to be okay. That, like, you can let go, I guess. I don't know. It's one of those things, like, I can't understand it. Every time I try to think about what it could mean, I come up with nothing. But it has this emotional impact on me that makes this whole thing just come across as, like, it wasn't horrible, it wasn't this monster or whatever. It's about, like, just a mother and her child and learning to let go.
I have my interpretation of what it means, I suppose, but to me it is echoing the Minotaur comments, it is a haunting tale of inevitability. Because it is naive for, like, the doctors and the nurses to be like, this baby born with literally missing parts of its brain is going to live because of what the mother is doing.
Yeah.
In reality, what the mother is doing is staving off and preparing for an inevitability of the baby's death. And for me, it was a very... haunting really is, I think, the right word here. A very haunting testament to the mechanisms that we can use to make peace with the inevitable. Because a Minotaur is a concrete, antagonistic thing. It is an evil that has to be defeated. But the passage of time and the inevitability of death is something that comes for everyone. It comes for Holloway inside the room. It comes for Johnny at, I think, what is clearly the end of his natural lifespan. It comes for Navidson after he decides to leave, inevitably. And it comes for that baby. And the moral I get from the story, and the moral I get from its inclusion in the longer, like, tale of Johnny and Zampano, is that you are never going to be able to defeat inevitability. You're never going to be able to gun down the Minotaur that is waiting for us all at the end of our lifespan. But you can ease its passage. And the fact that in a brief moment of lucidity and clarity, Johnny harkens back to this story that reflects that is really, really just intensely beautiful in a haunting way.
He can make peace with the fact that this inevitable is going to happen. That's the word that I think best explains. It is a peaceful feeling. Mm-hmm. It makes you feel like, this sucks, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. Which is something that I feel like, it's such a simple message, but everyone kind of needs to hear it. Like, no matter what's going on, like, it's gonna be okay. Mm-hmm. You'll find a way through this. You'll find peace somehow.
And, by the end, Johnny is in a pretty similar scenario as that kid. He is losing... He repeats the same, like, 3 or 4 months, like 8 or 9 times. He is just missing large swaths of memory.
It's very likely he has the same schizophrenia that his mother did.
Yeah, it is a degenerative inevitability that he knew was coming. And
Yeah, and I mean, he's basically like a homeless guy living off like whatever change he can scrounge up at that point.
Yeah.
And then it's weird, just like after that, then the Navidson record just like sort of ends really abruptly with this nice...
There's 2 pages of it!
Yeah. It just sort of wraps it up. It's like, and then Karen overcame her fears, and she made peace with, and like, I guess Navidson made peace with his inevitability too. Mm-hmm. That's why he had to go back into the house to just sort of be like, you know, I know it's inevitable that this will happen, but I'm going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until he lost everything and had nothing and was just in the void that he was finally like, you know, this is all right.
I mean, there's...
Thinking about Karen.
There's a sense of inevitability for every character, right? Like...
Yeah.
Karen is like, oh, you know, at some
I don't know, see, that's the thing, is like, Karen's the only one who doesn't have the inevitability, because she's one of the few people who, like, has a concrete arc where she has a fear, and at the end, because of love, she overcomes that fear, and she saves Navidson. Mm-hmm. And the house allows her and them to leave.
Yeah, I like that. That is a good point.
Maybe that's why people think that Karen wrote the book.
Because she's the most sympathetic.
You know, and I gotta give us a little bit of credit. We went this whole time, and we never, like, mentioned that Karen is, like, a Karen.
Oh, yeah. Jesus, you're right.
Yeah. I completely forgot that name had, like, anything associated with it.
Uh-huh.
But that just goes to show how well they, like, wrote everything.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, with that, you know, I think we've probably reached the end. We've said just about everything I want to say, at least today. I'm sure there's more stuff I could think about, but just talking about it, like, I already have so much. I'm going to spend all day just sort of, like, wandering around, pondering things.
Yeah, no, this was a lot. We made it through a lot here today.
Definitely one of the more interesting episodes. Next time, I think we'll be back to, like, reading fantasy books and talking about dragons and stuff, so that'll be a lot easier.
Good luck editing. I wish you well.
It's I wonder if I could edit this into like some sort of non-linear audio experience.
Yeah, you have to subscribe to 4 or 5 different channels to like locate different portions of it.
Yeah, parts of it are going to be on Instagram, parts of it are going to be on Twitter. You're going to have to slow down.
I do want to say, it is very cool that there clearly was a community for this book that no longer exists. This is such an early 2000s thing, but there are decodable HTML, like HTTP links in the book.
Oh, there are?
That lead to posts on domain names that do not exist anymore.
Huh.
So if you look up like Secrets of House of Leaves blogs, some of them still exist on like GeoCities clones and reference material that is no longer hosted anywhere. So it's very interesting how in the world of the novel, this entire school of literary criticism vanished overnight. So is vanishing the criticism surrounding this book and the secrets that it holds. I think there seriously will be a time, probably in our lifetimes, like 40 to 50 years, where the book is incomprehensible as anything but the paper it is printed on. It won't exist as an artifact to which there are dedicated followers on the internet. There won't be secrets hidden in, like, songs hosted on YouTube. It will literally just be the book in and of itself. And I hope and pray that the people who are reading it then, if they still exist, will feel the same destabilization Johnny felt when trying to look up what Stanley Kubrick said about the Davidson record.
Well, with that, I think we're going to end it. Thanks again to MBT for coming on here. Yeah. I guess you want to pimp out your YouTube channel, your Twitch.
I mean, I guess
something like that. Where can people find you?
I'm on youtube.com/MBT. That's MBT, just the letters, and then the word Yu-Gi-Oh. That's also my Twitch locale as well, where I stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Though, truth be told, there's very little of what you're hearing here today on it, at least for the time being.
But yeah, so make sure you check him out. You can occasionally get stuff out of him, some interesting thoughts on like literature or politics or whatever, if you prod him on his Yu-Gi-Oh streams. If nothing else, there's still interesting Yu-Gi-Oh stuff. Same with my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Speaking of which, if you like this show, if you'd like to support it, the Hardleg Gaming Patreon covers everything, including this. You can join my Discord. I have a separate forum just on there for talking about this podcast, where you could submit questions or discussion points. No one did it this time. No one read the book, unfortunately, but
this is a hard one to penetrate.
There's a couple people who bought it and they're like, I'm still kind of getting through it.
That's fair. By the time you're done editing, they'll probably have read it.
Yeah. And as for next month, I'm not quite sure yet. I've got 2 books that I'm kind of going through. I'm not sure if I can finish it on time. We might want to do The Ables by Jeremy Scott, which was recommended by my friend Bardbreaker. It's about a bunch of people with disabilities who get superpowers. And it's apparently written by the creator of CinemaSins.
Oh, God.
Which I am not a fan of.
I was
going to
say.
To see, like, how does Mr. Nitpick the hell out of everything write his own story? Time to nitpick the hell out of it. I'm going to have so many dings.
I mean, every page you have to say scene does not contain a lap dance, to the chagrin of your 15-year-old audience.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, I've also been trying to work through more Wheel of Time. I'm on the 6th book, which is the best book by far. Like, holy shit, I fucking love Wheel of Time. Up until now, I've been buying them like 2 at a time, and I got halfway through this, and I'm like, fuck it, buy the rest of the 14. There's no way I'm not finishing it after this one. But it's also the longest one. It's like more than 1,000 pages. And so I'm not sure if I'll finish it and be able to finish The Ables in time as well. So might be The Ables next time. Might be The Lord of Chaos, the 6th Wheel of Time book. Which I actually got my other co-host to read, so we'll have more discussion that time.
Coincidentally, also the name of the most recent Yu-Gi-Oh set.
Lord of Chaos?
I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised, although they wouldn't put Lord. That'd be like that'd be too religious for them. We still haven't gotten the cross on Foolish Burial. Cowards. Anyway, thanks for coming, and until next time, keep reading those books. Or I can never think of a sign out.
Until next time, please read. I am begging you.
Oh wait, until next time, Yggdrasil.
There we go. We got to it.